I would like questions along the way. So feel free to raise your hand. You can go under reactions, raise hand when you have questions, and then I'll find a break in my sharing to call on people with questions. I like to get questions in context, so feel free to raise your hand during the presentation, and I'll answer questions as we go. So the agenda, I already did the intro to the Freethinker Institute. I'm going to talk about free will as it relates to consciousness, and then I'm going to talk about how the dictionary and I define consciousness. I get a little more specific than the dictionary, so I'm consistent with it, but I'm also more specific than the dictionary. And then I'm going to talk about how I think consciousness works, and then I'll try to also kind of ad hoc the last question about whether technology can help or hurt us in experiencing consciousness. So first of all, if determinists are right, then consciousness is basically just a complex set of biological and chemical reactions culminating in the illusion of free will, but it's pretty much autonomous and predetermined. The thing is, if that's true, then determinism is right, and really we have no freedom in free will, because every decision is already decided. Ever since the Big Bang, it has been. I don't think that's true. I did a discussion on free will a while back, where I made an argument defending free will. So I'm going to basically go to where I think if we have libertarian free will, which is what I defend, which I do think I can defend. And if people are interested, I think Ellis will probably post the online community for the Freethinker Institute in the chat. If you want to go ahead and do that, Ellis. And for anyone interested in the essay on free will, it makes a pretty good argument, I think, that we do have libertarian free will. And if that argument is right, then I would argue that there is something non-physical that's influencing the physical universe. And I call that a spirit. And religions call it a soul. I don't like that term because it's religiously loaded, and I'm not religious. But I guess I'm basically proposing that the spirit is the root cause of consciousness, and I'll go into the mechanics of how the whole thing works from my perspective. To give a little bit of science that backs that up, Libet has done. He's a famous neuroscientist that's done experimentation on free will. He was originally credited with disproving free will, but he then did later experiments that showed that, and the reason that he said that he disproved free will is because people became consciously aware of a decision after the official decision was made. But he later actually came up with new experiments that showed that people actually have veto rights of decisions even earlier than that. So we do at least have enough free will to make vetoed decisions even before the prior experiments. And so, long story short, the truth is, I think that the decisions are made prior to even Libet's detecting them, and I'll go into that in the in sort of the proposal of how I think consciousness really works from a chronological perspective. So that said, definition of consciousness, the dictionary definition is awareness of one's own existence, sensations, thoughts, surroundings, etc. My definition is that I think it's a function of reflection, assimilating sensory perception, learning, and influencing subconscious decision-making of a sentient being that makes libertarian free will decisions, which results in conscious thoughts and actions. And so the idea here is that our conscious mind actually influences the subconscious and the spirit, which then makes the decision. And I'm going to go into sort of the order here is that the conscious mind influences the spirit, where the actual decision is made in the spirit. And then that spirit influences microtubules in the brain, which if you look at scientific theory, you can, I'll post this presentation in the chat. This is an article that shows that scientists have traced back consciousness to microtubules in the brain, and they don't really understand why those microtubules are doing what they do. My proposition is that it's actually the spirit that is influencing microtubules at a subatomic level using quantum mechanics to influence how those microtubules act, and then using something called halon theory, which basically says that small building blocks can then form into larger building blocks. Basically, the microtubules influence the brain, which influences the body, and then culminates into a conscious decision where there is a very quick veto power that the Lebedev experiments show. And then the brain actually commands the body, which is common known science, right? The brain directs the body into what it's going to do. And so in doing this, we kind of create this holistic theory of, or hypothesis. It's not a theory till we have a lot of experimental data, but we have this holistic hypothesis that goes from beginning to end, which I can, again, I don't expect people that haven't seen my argument for free will to fully buy into this. All I would ask is for your curiosity to understand the argument for free will. And if that argument makes sense, then I think I can logically defend the rest. And so that said, I think that consciousness and our free will can be used to influence the lives of ourselves and people that we can influence. And I one of the the 5 intentions of the Free Thinker Institute is to increase happiness and decrease harm. And so what I want to encourage everyone to do is to use your free will for making decisions that increase happiness and decrease harm, which is one of the primary purposes of the Free Thinker Institute, is to help us all, increase happiness and decrease harm. And so with that said, I'm gonna, before I go to this, I'm gonna try to talk about, can technology help or hurt us in experiencing consciousness? I'd argue it can do both. I think a lot of social media distracts us from reality or gives us false perceptions of reality from seeing people's best moments. And so there's a lot of sort of distraction that can occur from technology, but there's also a lot technology can do in terms of empowering us to make better, more well-informed decisions. We have more knowledge at our fingertips now than we ever have in the history of humanity. And I think that's a really powerful thing. But to give the famous quote, with power comes responsibility, technology is really just power, and it gives us more power, and we have to use it responsibly in order to do more good in the world. And I consider more good seeing the truth clearly and increasing happiness and decreasing harm. And if we're doing that and we're using technology to do it, then I see that as a good thing that's helping us experience consciousness in a more positive way. So that's kind of my take on things. Anyone have questions about any of that? And I'll go to any questions on any of that? Ayala.
Yeah. First of all, it looks like spirit is still a very vague concept. It doesn't help the vagueness of consciousness. That's one, but most of the free will debates have to do with the idea of desert, whether people deserve praise, punishment, or how much punishment, or what do they deserve. And with this kind of presentation, we don't, the society and the circumstances of one's position in life is not taken into account, does it? How much free will there is if research shows that 50% is genetics, the rest has to do with gender? Well, you also have very little choice, maybe a little choice now, and circumstances that evolve from that. So how much free will really you have to influence or to use in life, even which the process that you described, Jared.
So great questions, Ayala. Spirit for me is the essence of who we are. So I guess for me it's a there might be some vagueness, but it's really the essence of what makes you you is your spirit. And so it is the origin of consciousness. That's kind of the definition of it, is the essential building block of who a person is. More than half of the world thinks that there is some sort of existence after death, and the spirit is what carries on after death in that case. And part of that community feels that there's rebirth, and part of it thinks that you go to eternal heaven or hell. But regardless, that's I guess what I see as the spirit, is the sort of central core of who a human being is. If there's more vagueness than that, like if there are questions that you have, Ayala, that doesn't answer, I welcome you to raise your hand again and ask the specific questions that you feel like are vague, and I'll try to answer them. I'm not saying I know everything, but I'll do my best to answer them. As far as free will conversations being about what people deserve, I don't see free will as a matter of whether or not people deserve things. I think it's more about whether or not people can change their future. And determinists assume that the future is written in stone and that we can't change it. Whereas people who believe in free will believe we can change our future, and I think we can. And we can change it drastically for the better if we focus on learning and personal development, which is part of the first intention, is to be the best version of ourselves, seek truth, and be fair, which I think are good things to go after in life. And so I guess I don't think it's about what we deserve. As far as recent studies showing that decisions are 50% genetic, that still leaves another 50%. If that's even true, it leaves another 50%, which is a pretty significant portion of our future to put into our hands. As far as like how much free will we have, I'll give an example. We're going to have another discussion another day about the power of free will. But I guess I like to give the example of I saw a YouTube video about a guy who has no arms and no legs, but swims. He literally swims by like undulating his body. And, for me, that's a testament to how powerful free will can be. His genetics said he should never be able to swim in his life, but he worked so hard and did so much practice and put so much energy into learning how to swim that with no arms and legs, he swims. That's a lot of power that free will can have on someone to overcome their genetic disposition, right? So I would argue free will is actually, I used to, when I was growing up, think it was nature and nurture. Now I think it's nature, nurture, and free will. And I think the most powerful of the three is free will. But it's only powerful if we know that we have it and we take advantage of it and we try hard with our free will. I like to joke that the only people that have free will are the ones that believe in it. Because if you think you don't have free will, you're just going to do what's easiest in life or what you feel inclined to do, and you don't actually make any conscious decisions. You just go with the flow. That said, I want to let Bruce ask his question. And Ayala, if I didn't answer your question about spirit, feel free to raise your hand again.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Loud and clear.
Specifically, I think it's good that we start like with definitions, when you can define things sort of anywhere, so long as they are actually possible. And most of the determinists are basing their argument, let us say, on deterministic equations defining the universe, and that there was an actual beginning, everything was set in motion. Lately, there's another school of thought, is that there was no actual beginning, that the universe is eternal and infinite. And since there was no actual beginning, there's no starting point for things to be put in motion. And from Green's theorem, it then becomes blatantly obvious that, yes, it is entirely possible for there to be free will. It's not enclosed by deterministic equations and so on. So I wanted to bring that point up, that it's perfectly possible to make your definition that free will is actually possible, where the determinists are saying that if everything is defined by a beginning, and this is a cosmological sort of argument, from a beginning, So I'm totally with you on saying free will seems like it's kind of obvious that it's there. The other thing you were talking about is something called the conscious mind. And I'm looking now at consciousness. You were talking about microtubules on a subatomic level or quantum mechanics. So which interpretation of quantum mechanics are you taking? Are you taking the Copenhagen interpretation, or are you taking Schrödinger's interpretation? If we look at Schrödinger's interpretation, we're seeing things such as potential. And this potential is basically systemic throughout the universe. And that our consciousness may not be separate from other individuals, that we're all part of a potential that forms consciousness, if you like, at a certain concentration, if you like, of this potential, which is a result of Schrödinger's equation and so forth. So do you have anywhere where you're thinking of consciousness as not being particularly isolated to the individual, but consciousness is something that we all share?
Thanks, Bruce. And actually, I presented another night on origins of the universe, and I'm with the Eternalists. I think the universe has always existed, and we will eventually get that up on YouTube for anyone interested in that topic. And it's also, I'm with the Greeks, who also believed in eternalism. But I have a logical argument that coincides with the Big Bang and explains how the universe can be infinite, and how all of the science from the Big Bang can be consistent with that. But that said, I don't want to deviate too much into that. As far as the interpretation of quantum mechanics, I'm not in any of the mainstream camps. I have my own take on that, and I don't want to answer like all the details, because I would want to, you know, go into more detail on the things that I agree with and don't agree with on each of them. And so I'm gonna not answer that one right now. Other than to say, like, if you have a specific question, Bruce, about quantum mechanics, I can answer specific questions, but I don't want to give a generalized response without doing my homework before I present a more cohesive, comprehensive answer. Okay. And with that said, DLJ.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Well, actually, yeah, Ayala took my original question regarding spirit, so thanks for the definition of that.
Sure.
But then you moved on to talk about, or to recover, determinism. So just checking, you've taken in the compatibilist view into account with your.
No, I'm not a compatibilist. I'm a libertarian free will believer.
Sorry, yeah, I know you said it, but I mean,
Yeah.
You must have at some point you've rejected determinism. So have you looked at compatibilism and decided that this doesn't fit with your model either? Yeah.
Yes. So compatibilism says that we have free will and determinism is right. And for me, that's basically saying we have free will, but there's no freedom in the free will. And so for me, that doesn't make sense. I wouldn't even call it free will if there's no freedom. If the decision is already determined, I wouldn't, there's no freedom in the free will.
Well, maybe if I could rephrase it slightly, let's say we've evolved with a program that allows us to choose. So conditional branching, or if then, or what
Right.
if and what, is part of our pre-programming to allow us to choose. So that would be the compatibilist approach. So it is deterministic that we can choose.
So you can use determinism to sort of justify like the that free will evolved naturally, but then you kind of have to say that it, like, we evolved naturally a perception that we have free will without actually having free will. And so you kind of have to say that that perception that we have free will evolved randomly,
No.
even though.
I'm not sure you need to go that far. You just need to say that we have will. Will is okay under the compatibilist. I mean, it's essentially close, right?
You know, again, I don't want to go too much into the free will argument, because it's not like the intent is, I mean,
Sure.
they are inherently linked, but I don't want to go too much into it, because we did that
another.
another night. But it's,
Okay.
you know, I would love to chat with you about that in the online community, if you get the chance to join. I do have an essay on determinism and how it's all but completely disproven by accepted science, which would be, you know, worth reading before we chat about it. But I would love to chat with you about it in there.
All right. So I did. I mean, just as a side theme, but not for now. I do have a way of under the compatibilist model, a way of explaining Libet's models, and it still holds true without having to have a spirit or anything. So we'll do that another time.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. I would love to hear it.
Hi,
Um,
Garrett, it's me.
yes.
I'll send the online community to DLJ, and we'll go with Sanjay and Ayala. And
Yeah.
I think, and then there's a question in the chat. There's a person that wants you to go over the definition of consciousness again, and then we'll move to the next presentation.
Sure. So Sanjay and then Ayala, and then I have the definition of consciousness up. So for the person that asked that, that's up on the screen right now. So maybe just go ahead and read that, and I'll let Sanjay and Ayala ask their questions.
Yeah, I think Ayala is before me. This is Sanjay.
Yeah, she already asked, I think, is why Ellis put you first, but I'm fine going either direction. So if you want to defer to her, we can have Ayala go first.
Sure. So I had some wanted to get some clarification. So I think you described microtubules as being not understood by science. I don't know if I heard that correctly.
So the origin of why microtubules do what they do is not understood by science. Like, why do microtubules have non-deterministic behavior is not understood by science, right? No, like science, the accepted science doesn't really understand quantum mechanics fully and doesn't understand why there's what they perceive as randomness in quantum mechanics. And so that's what I'm referring to there, is the sort of the origins of where microtubules get their activity from is not understood by science. Does that make sense as a distinction?
So I understand what you're saying, but I work in the biological sciences, and I know that microtubules are understood. Now, many things in biology are not understood to the nth degree. They are understood to a certain level that they explain processes, and the same for microtubules. So they are understood fairly well in terms of how information, for example, in axons, in neurons, how information and signals, neurotransmitters are carried using microtubules. So that is understood fairly well.
So
and since we're talking about consciousness,
when you say it's understood well, are you saying the origins of the behavior that's experienced or that's observed in microtubules, the deterministic origins of that behavior is understood well? Because if so, then we would have traced back consciousness to its origin. And I haven't read that that's actually happened yet.
Well, you're linking consciousness with microtubules, and that's not. I don't believe that they are linked necessarily, and I can give a separate reason why. But first, the assumption that microtubules and consciousness have a link, that's an assumption that you're making, but I don't agree with that. So
it's actually in this article, so you should read the article, because that's a sort of a connection that the authors of the article made.
Right, but that looks like a article for consumer media. It's a science daily, is not a. Anyway, so I mean, I'm sure I've read some of the things that you've looked at, but I come from a different area. I come from a very strong area of science in the biological sciences, and microtubules are understood to the level where we can. I mean, and there are not only one type of microtubules. There are actually many types of microtubules throughout cellular automata that in biological tissues. But specific to thinking and consciousness and brain function, they are mainly responsible for the axonal. So basically, how signals move through axons, through nerve signals, and that part is understood sufficiently that we can explain how neurotransmitters and signals pass from one neuron to the other. And
Sure.
the point I wanted to make about as far as whether they are tied with quantum mechanics and therefore consciousness is that quantum mechanics occurs at a scale that's much, much less than what biological molecules, the size of biological molecules would allow. The molecules we're talking about are on the order of micrometers and microns, dozens and hundreds of microns. And quantum effects don't appear at that level at all. They appear much, much smaller levels. And when you try to explore quantum effects at the large scale level that you're talking about, they can't be studied and they pretty much disappear. This is where the distinction between the quantum mechanics, the physics of quantum mechanics, and the standard model in Einstein's model of physical world, they diverge, and we don't yet have a explanation. So I don't think we can say that quantum mechanics is responsible for consciousness, or even that they're responsible for microtubules. That there's no data around that today.
Right. I'm not saying there is data, Sanjay. I'm an inventor, right? I come up with new ideas that haven't been thought of before. So this is a new hypothesis that I'm coming up with here. It's not one that's been experimented on or that there are studies on, and there's nothing like that yet. It's a hypothesis, right? And what I would argue is you're absolutely right about everything you're saying. We do understand how neurons transfer data, but we don't understand, the connection from the quantum mechanics level to the microtubules level. But I will argue that as we start to learn more and more, and we get more micro and more micro, we're going to keep, finding that the phenomena disappears at the lower levels, which is what you described. And we're going to find that even down to the very micro level of quantum mechanics until we start to describe it as randomness. And what I would argue is it's not randomness, it's actually the spirit influencing things at the quantum mechanics level, which is, again, like, it's a prediction that I'm making. It's not I'm not claiming that I'm teaching a scientific fact that's well known. I'm claiming that I have a hypothesis on how to explain things that aren't otherwise explainable right now. Does that make sense, Sanjay, as a distinction?
No, I understand. So just one last point. I want to let other people speak also, but I recognize this is your idea, or it's an elaboration of Penrose and other people who have made this theory. But another way to look at it is that if you try to place quantum mechanics into this, you're basically creating a mechanism for thought and consciousness and human brain activity, which can be explained using much more simpler processes, and it has been explained. But you're bringing in this much more complicated thing to explain something that we already have. So what's the advantage? That's what I would leave it at.
What explanation do we already have, Sanjay, of consciousness?
So they're actually, well, we don't have anything that completely proves how consciousness works, because that will require a lot more work in the neurosciences. But we do have a pretty good understanding of how information flows within the brain. I mean, for example, there's a theory IIT that I don't know if you've heard of, which discusses consciousness. And I'm not saying that's a correct theory, but that's the predominant theory right now in basically all of the sciences that are looking at consciousness.
Right. So we do have an understanding of how information flows in the brain. I agree with that. We don't have an understanding of the origin of where those ideas originate from. And that's what I'm positing here, is that the origin is at the quantum mechanics level, influenced by the spirit. So that's
I would ask you to look into IIT, because IIT actually does posit where it comes from. I don't agree with IIT fully, and I'm not a proponent for it, but certain parts of it make a lot of sense. So I would suggest that you look into it, because it is another theory which actually does a better job of predicting these things, and much simpler than quantum mechanics.
What's the theory again? Can you type it in? Because I'm not like, go ahead.
It's basically, it stands for Integrated Information Theory, IIT. I'll put it in the chat. Yeah.
Integrated information theory is good. I'll take a look at it, but I find that most people trying to explain consciousness are determinists, and so I think they're barking up the wrong tree, quite frankly. So that's why I can take a look at it, but my hypothesis is that they're determinists, and that's why they're not coming to the right answer. And it sounds like you yourself are skeptical of it, so I probably will be too, but I'm going to listen to it with an open mind. I think all new ideas should be listened to with an open mind, and I'll listen to this one with an open mind too. That said, I want to let Ayala ask her question, and then for the other folks that have their hand up, I want to get to the next speaker. So if you could hold your hands or hold your questions for the end after the other speakers have gone. I want to let Ayala ask her question, probably about spirit, because I asked her to raise her hand if she had another question about the vagueness of spirit. So go ahead, Ayala.
I'll be short. Just that positing free will against as the other side of determinism is not necessarily so. Other than determinism, there are social forces, there are circumstances and randomness. So to your example of the guy without arms and legs being able to swim, yes, that shows very strong will, but not necessarily free will. What research shows is that family support, social support, high intelligence, a lot of factors have to do with a person confidence in and being positive in life and being strong-willed. But if a person is, let's say this one would be in Guantanamo or in prison, and he has strong will, as strong as they come to get out, he will still stay there until who knows. So the will is not necessarily free, and we shouldn't be mixing will with free will. And that's all. Go ahead.
So Ayala, I would encourage you to read the essay on free will that I wrote, which is in the online community in the reference channel. And I guess I would say that as far as like saying that social conditions allowed him to do that, sure, like they may have been a factor, but whoever the first guy was that had no arms and legs and decided to swim, I can't imagine everyone was supporting him in that idea, saying, hey, yeah, go for it. They were probably afraid he was going to drown to death. And someone had to have the will to decide, I have the will to do this and I'm going to make it happen, even though, you know, it's like really unlikely that I'm going to be able to do it. He still decided to do that. That said, you know, you should trust your own judgment, but I would highly encourage you to read the essay on free will that I wrote, because it makes a pretty good logical argument that libertarian free will exists. And I haven't found a reason anyone able to punch a hole in it in over a decade. So that said, I do want to go to the next speaker. So thank you guys for your questions. I really appreciate them. Feel free to ask more at the end. But I want to let Himanshu go next. And Himanshu, if you could just let us know if you want questions along the way or at the end of your presentation. And then I'm going to stop sharing in case you have anything to share, and go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Garrett. I think it would be good if the questions are towards the end. Let all the speakers speak, and then we can do it towards the end.
Well, we're doing we're doing question we're each going to have like a round of questions for each one of us, and so you can choose like whether they ask questions while you're speaking or at the end of your speaking. But I'd like to give people a chance to ask you specifically questions first, and then if people don't have questions for you specifically, then they can ask them at the end.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. So
Cool.
Maybe towards the end, once I speak, I have a few chain of thought that I want to talk about. So, it's a very complex topic, and I'll try to simplify it as much as possible from my own understanding of consciousness. And I'm not a scientist, but I have a different lens coming from India. While growing up in India, I lost a few close relatives, and when they lost their life, I saw their dead bodies. And I used to ask people as an innocent child, why this person died. And the answers I used to get were like heart failure, cancer, or some other ailment. But this only answered the question how, and nobody could tell me why. And that was this question, the why, was something that kept haunting me. And this is a philosophical question that is in many philosophies and many religious beliefs. And I believe science is a small part of philosophy. Science is, science is measurement, and measurement is science. So if you can measure something, then it is scientific. But if you cannot measure it, it does not really include in it. But over a period of time, science develops and and expands. And I believe science is simple curiosity trying to understand the universe. So nothing is really set in stone, but as human beings evolve, we get more answers. But I think the whole incident really taught me that there is something beyond the body that gives life to the body. So the question of what is life is the next step in understanding of consciousness. The other, small kind of question that I ask myself sometimes, like, for example, we can do it here. I'm looking at all of you on my computer screen. If I close my eyes, I will not see you and will not know if you all exist. So ultimately, it is my perception or my own consciousness, or you can say awareness, or the signals from my senses that tell me that you all exist. So if, as Max Planck says, if there is perception, there must be a perceiver. So am I a mere perceiver? And, these are kind of questions that kind of, people ask, but when we get into the scientific domain, consciousness used to be outside of the scientific domain, scope of science. And it's only in the recent past that people have started looking into it from a scientific point of view. The advances in neuroscience, modern physics, and computer science probably, confront this question about who the observer is. And there is a whole concept of biocentrism. There is an interesting book by Robert Lanza, who's a professor of medicine, and he talks about we see world through consciousness. So which means if I am looking at everybody on the screen, I'm not really looking at it through my eyes. Eyes are probably just the instrument, but maybe it's the consciousness looking at everybody. So let's rest that case for now, go further into the concept of consciousness. And does science really understands consciousness? And I feel the materialistic science that we know cannot really get into it. There is a book called Theory of Reality by David Weber. He's a professor of neurology at Mayo Clinic. And he talks about reality being very different from what you and I see through senses. And I think this is where he's hinting about consciousness. So what we perceive is not really the reality. Reality is more than what we see. And the Indian wisdom talks about consciousness being all-pervading. And if you know consciousness, you know everything. So it is what is supposed to be known. It is the science of all sciences. It is the knowledge of all knowledge. And science, as I said, is evolving. It's not absolute. I'll give you a small example just to argue why we should not be more dogmatic about science. In 1907, I guess, J.J. Thomson said, electrons are particles, and he won a Nobel Prize. 30 years later, his son, G.J. Thomson, gets a Nobel Prize, and he said particles are waves. And then Heisenberg said, it's neither particles or waves, and he coined the uncertainty principle. And then in the recent past, Hans-Peter Dewar said, matter does not exist. Everything is a vibration. And the same vibration exists in millions of shapes and forms of life. I think this is closer to the concept of consciousness that I've grown up with in the Indian context, reading about consciousness in the yoga philosophy. And the Indian philosophy talks about consciousness being very difficult to explain. And I can see a reason why, because language is linear and it can only express us to a certain point, but unfolding the whole universe takes place in multitudes of dimensions, and language is limited in its scope to explain reality, which is why understanding consciousness is an experiential knowledge. It can only be experienced. It's very difficult to express. And this is why we have so many views, philosophies, ideologies. and people spar with each other. The Indian philosophy also talks about consciousness being the higher knowledge. And to understand consciousness, the way to do it is through intuition and meditation, because the materialistic science is very analytical in nature. We can debate for hours about consciousness, and still we may not be able to arrive at what consciousness is. But if we can experience consciousness, we'll know what it is. And that is the end of all knowledge systems, because that is where all knowledge evolves or is born. So coming back to the definition of consciousness that Garrett talked about, and the consciousness is also defined in so many ways. We can loosely talk about conscious state and unconscious state. So if I'm talking, I'm being aware of my surroundings and I'm in a wakeful state, I can call myself conscious. If somebody hits me on the head and I fall down, I'm unconscious. So is consciousness being aware of the world? So which means consciousness equals to awareness? I think it's much more than that, because we live in 3 states of our being. There are more states that the Indian philosophy describes, but I think the 3 main states are wakeful state, dream state, and deep sleep state. So in the wakeful state, we are aware of who we are, and we are conscious, very loosely created. We don't really know who we are yet. That's a philosophical question. But in the dream state, we are present, we are experiencing, which means we are conscious. In the deep sleep state, we are not there, meaning we experience nothingness, but when we get out of it, somebody has experienced that nothingness or emptiness. So in all these 3 states, there is a self that exists. So the question is, who is this self? Is this consciousness? Is it me? And who is me? Is it my body? Is it my mind? Is it my awareness? Or is it consciousness? So, body, brain, mind, and consciousness are 4 broad concepts to really understand. There was a neurosurgeon, Wilder Penfield, and he got a Nobel Prize and he said, mind is in the brain. And one can stimulate the body and make the body move. But before he died, I guess few minutes before he died, he actually amended his statement. And he said, mind is outside the brain. So brain is not really, we can say consciousness is a product of the brain, or is brain the product of consciousness? And I think our body and mind are product of consciousness, not the other way around. And I can explain it further. Brain has millions of neurons, and it cannot by itself think of a thought. It needs a mind to think of a thought. And consciousness, by definition, is a canvas on which our thoughts are projected. Body has a face, but mind has no face. So to give you an analogy of what exactly is the relationship between consciousness, body, and mind, maybe, like when during Christmas, we put these tea lights around the house. Imagine that these bulbs are bodies, and the electric current that flows through it is the consciousness that gives life. So it's the consciousness has no face, but it is life within each one of us. And mind is a product of the body. Mind is matter, is product of matter, and mind dies with the body because mind is basically your own thought process. But at the same time, I would not say that consciousness is only a human concept. Every being in this universe or in this world, as we know, has some level of consciousness. It's just that we have a brain, which is an instrument that can access more intelligence to understand and be more conscious. And because of that, we have the ability to imagine, we have the ability to create, we have the ability to explore new ideas. So we are more creative because of our human brain. We can store more memories in it.
Himanshu, I don't mean to rush you, but we're about halfway through the event and I do want to give people questions at the end. So
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll try to pace it up.
Yeah, no worries.
But every other being, whether it's animal, plant, they may not have a well-developed brain, but there is a certain level of awareness in all of them. Even in our own body, every cell of our body has a certain level of awareness, has a certain level of intelligence in it. So who manages that intelligence? Who is keeping it all together? And that is what consciousness is. Even in the inanimate objects, even in, say, wood or metal, there are these atoms. The electrons know how to circle. They create a pattern in which they rotate. They know how they have to mix with other fluid and what it would become. They know what would it be when it decays. So where is that intelligence coming from? The other, concept, I'll talk about before I end is the whole unity of consciousness. Though we are all connected with each other through consciousness, and that is what the Indian wisdom talks about. Just like, when I'm breathing, my own breath is being inhaled by somebody else far, far away because the breath is traveling. So we are all connected to each other through breath. Likewise, we are all connected to each other through this consciousness. And when we see each other as conscious being, as energy or vibration is also energy that science talks about, we are not going to be the same person again. It will take us to the core of our being, which is consciousness, which is where creativity, intuition, and happiness develops. And that is the path for being happy, because all of us are trying to be happy in everything that we do, because happiness is our inner core nature. We are born out of that consciousness, which is bliss, eternal bliss. And because of how our mind is made up, we have lost touch with it. We are more external facing, and our mind is driving us in a certain direction. But if we retract it, clarify the mind, we'll go back to our roots, which is consciousness, which is all bliss consciousness. So with that, I would pause and seek any questions you might have.
Ocean, you have your hand up. Did you have a question for Himanshu?
Yes.
Actually,
Hi.
Himanshu
Can you-
actually
Hi,
asked-
can you
oh,
hear
I'm
me?
sorry.
Can you hear me?
I
I'm
thought
here.
I thought he said Jenny. Did you say Jenny?
Sorry, I said
No,
Ocean.
Ocean.
Ocean had his hand up. If you have a question, Jenny, just put your hand up and then we'll get to you.
No, it's okay. He answered my question.
Okay, great.
Okay, so Garrett, thank you. And I have actually, if you don't mind, I have a question for you. You mentioned about the free will and the determinism.
So,
Would you
Ocean,
mind?
I apologize to cut you off. Wait, hold questions for me until after everybody's presented.
Okay,
because-
then I have a question for this presenter.
Okay, go
So
ahead.
you said there's a distinction between brain and consciousness is beyond the brain. So I have a simple question that when you are talking to us right now, isn't that your brain coming up with all the words and concept and sharing to us, or it's not your brain? What is presenting all those, producing those words that communicating with us right now?
So I would say, our senses are tools to express and to consume information. So our tongue, our eyes, they're all senses in which you can express yourself. The brain, our brain helps in processing all the information and the memories and the imagination that you have. But what gives us life so that we can talk is consciousness.
Well,
If there is no
yeah, there's
consciousness, if there is no consciousness, neither the brain will be helpful, nor our senses will be helpful, nor a beautiful body will be helpful.
So what I don't see the value in separating the brain and the consciousness that you're describing right now, because if somebody machine gunned your brain and if your brain is dead and your consciousness is not be able to share all those concepts to us right now, therefore it's the brain processing and producing all those words, and you can say it's a consciousness, but I don't see the value in separating the brain from the consciousness, because if somebody completely destroys your brain, you're no longer able to communicate with us right now.
Yes, so until there is life, our self is identified with our mind and body. So imagine that, we are like bubbles. There is air inside the bubble, and it's the outer covering, which is the soap solution, which is the body. As long as there is that bubble in its shape, it can express itself. It can move around. It has motion in it. But once the bubble bursts, there is no use of soap solution. It cannot express itself.
So if I am somebody who advocates that I want you to rebut me though. So if somebody said, oh, it's nonsense, it's all about our brain, processing all the stuff to survive, and breathing, heart beating, as well as creating and producing all the concept. It's all about our brain. It's nothing about consciousness. How you are going to rebut me?
Well, even after the body dies, the human cells are still alive. There are brain dead people who are still alive. So human body cells still operate until a certain time, even after the brain is dead, which means brain is not controlling your life.
I do want to be Ocean, if you don't mind, I do want to be conscious of the time. If you don't mind holding the rest of the line of questioning to the end, after everyone's presented, I want to be sure we have time for everybody to present. And
Except I want to make one last statement, which is that the people and the vegetables and the brain dead people lost who they are. If my mother became the vegetables, and my mother's body might be breathing through the extension hospital and extension machine, but essence of my mother is completely gone. That's it. Thank you.
So, yeah, Ocean, just remember, some brain dead people come back to consciousness, so it does happen. That said, I do want to let BE ask their question. So go ahead.
Yes, I just I'm a physician and a scientist, so I just want to clarify that brain dead people are brain dead is dead. That means that there's no brain activity. And yes, your heart and your lungs can work independently from your brain, but there are control centers within the brain that control your heart rate and your breathing. So you can survive a little bit, a couple of hours after your brain is dead. Like you can still, your heart still beats and all that stuff because the heart pumps independently from the brain. But
Yeah.
eventually your organs are gonna shut down. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Fair point. I was referring to being in a coma rather than brain death. So brain death is like beyond recovery according to, yeah. So thanks for clarifying, Becky.
Yeah, if you're in a coma, that means that there's still brain activity. Brain dead is no brain activity at all.
Got it.
Correct.
And
Yeah, so even after, a person has died in normal circumstances for certain period of time, the cells still operate, and then, slowly everything switches off.
right, it's like a factory, if you shut it down, there's still parts that are still
Correct.
operating and all that stuff. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
My question, my comment is one, in science, we have this principle of parsimony and what's called Occam's razor, right? We don't want to make unnecessary assumptions. We don't want to overcomplicate things, We don't want to add more complexity where it's not needed. So to Sanjay's point, I think he was saying, bringing in quantum mechanics when it's not necessary because, at the cell level, you're not operating at the quantum level. That's kind of goes against that principle in science, a scientific value of parsimony. Like we don't want to make unnecessary assumptions. Another thing is that you said that the brain produces, well, I believe that consciousness is a product of the brain. And the way because it's like, for example, when your kidneys produce urine, right? That is a product of your kidneys. It's not the other way around. It's not like the urine produces the kidneys. We produce urine, or our kidneys produce urine because we ingest food, water, juice, wine, whatever. We ingest all this food, and our kidneys, it's an input to the kidneys. They filter it and they produce a product that is urine. So the same way, our brains, right, is an organ, our brain is an organ. We get inputs from the environment, right? And internal inputs from our bodies, and they produce a state that is consciousness. So I don't know why we have to overcomplicate things and separate. One thing that I have a lot of problem with philosophers is whenever they separate mind and the body, and they overcomplicate things. So I would just ask you, like, what do you think about this principle of parsimony or Occam's razor, and not bringing in unnecessary assumptions to create a more difficult or more complex explanation that is required?
So I would say that, we perceive everything at a physical level, and anything that we cannot perceive on a physical plane, it's really difficult to fathom. And the concept of consciousness is an experiential knowledge. So it is difficult to understand, and one can only understand when we withdraw from the body and the mind, and that is possible during the meditation process. So when there is no disturbance from the body, the mind is also calm. At that point of time, all that remains is bliss, which means you are basically chopping off everything that defines you Because say, for example, if I define myself, I'm saying, my name is Himanshu, I have this body, I'm wearing this shirt, I'm 6 feet tall. So all that is the physical aspect of me. But once you chop that one by one, and what remains is the self, and that self is neither the body nor the mind, and that is pure consciousness. And that is the experiential knowledge that one gets during meditation. And when one feels very blissful in that particular experience, we think it is either touching the consciousness or maybe, getting close to the consciousness.
So I want to let Hans go, and then Bruce, if you could hold your question until after all the presenters have presented. Let's let Hans go. If you let's try to. I just want to give the next two presenters a chance as well.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, good, thank you. I'll try to be quick. I want to express an opinion and ask a question. My opinion, following on what was just said about Occam's razor and not making things more complicated. The discussion reminds me of a quote from Alan Watts, who said, trying to define oneself is like trying to bite one's own teeth. And so I think that's kind of related to what Mr. Himanshu said about science being a tool that measures. And maybe there are some things that are not, let's say, they don't really lend themselves to being measured with those particular tools. And maybe consciousness is one of those. And maybe there's others as well, like, friendship or beauty. You can't take a ruler or a calculator and quantify these things, right? So, if we were to apply Occam's razor, then, one thing I'd add is I appreciate that there are hypotheses, and I appreciate that, Garrett, that you've expressed your ideas as hypotheses, because we don't have proofs of a lot of things. But even if we were to say that consciousness is purely, a result of brain activity, well, that's also a hypothesis. And so it would be a leap to just say, well, that hypothesis is the answer. Wouldn't Occam's razor say, well, the simplest thing is to not try to impose any particular hypothesis, and maybe the simplest thing is to just not ask the question. Another metaphor that might come to mind is, using a microscope to try to examine the microscope itself. Is that not what we're doing when consciousness tries to understand what consciousness is? Anyway, I think that there's an opinion in there that I've expressed, which is that it's interesting, I think, to consider these models and hypotheses, and I think that they're all okay. But then we wind up having preferences, which models or hypotheses we like. So getting to my question for Himanshu, I have some familiarity with the Indian concepts, and I'm aware of a thing called spanda. There's a concept in Indian philosophy called spanda, which I'm not really an expert on this, but it's described as a kind of like a vibration, or it's like sort of the emanation of the fundamental consciousness that underlies everything, according to certain schools of thought in Indian philosophy. And there are some sources online that relate spanda to quantum mechanics. Obviously scientists are kind of uncomfortable with the idea that quantum mechanics seems to be introducing randomness. But if I understand correctly, spanda is saying that, well, okay, that's what it is actually, because the creativity of consciousness itself expresses itself that way. My question for Himanshu is, do you have any idea about spanda and whether it has some relationship to quantum mechanics?
So everything in this universe science has said it's a vibration. And this is a similar thing even in the Indian philosophy, where you experience that vibration, and that vibration, and there are different ways in which you can experience the vibration in your meditative process. And all of that leads to a certain kind of vibration. It could be through sounds, repetitive sounds, ultimately dissolve into a vibration. Different colors can be into a vibration, and vibration is just energy. Basically, that's what we're talking about. Vibration is just energy, pure energy form. And that energy can manifest itself into multiple forms and shapes, but ultimately you go to the source, which is the vibration. And that vibration ultimately brings that inner calm and peace. So, the whole universe is a dance of vibration. If you look at the Nataraja statue, that's basically vibration. You see at a basic atomic level, even the electron is moving around, and that is motion. And that further in the subatomic particle level, what I've read is, things become more vibrational in nature. There is, there is some talk on channels about hearing the sun as a vibrational sound. So even sun is creating a vibration. So it's going, I think overall, in order to go deep into yourself, you need to go subtle and subtle into the subtler planes, away from the physicality of things. So we are stuck with the physicality of the body and the outside world. So once we go within, from the body, then and the mind, once it is calm and clear, we go further into the consciousness. And there are various levels of consciousness. Consciousness is not just one consciousness. It's like an onion. You keep peeling until you go to the core. And it's infinite. There is no finite. It's just like the universe. Universe is not finite. And as you talked about different kinds of philosophies, there is panpsychism, which says everything has consciousness. There is pan-cosmic, which says, our human mind is like the universe, and even the universe is somebody else's human mind, because there is similarity between the two. So you can go into multiple theories and multiple philosophies, and different religions have their own take on it. But I feel it's more experiential, and we should know how to, we should aspire to experience it rather than, debate it, because there is no proof until you experience it. So as you said, simplify it to the basic level and then try to understand how can we experience it.
So thanks, Himanshu. I'm going to close out Himanshu's section for now. And Herb, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask if people can hold their questions until after you and Dr. Krishnesh, Dr. Mehta have both gone, because we're kind of way behind schedule right now. And I want to make sure that you both present. So if both of you can present, and then we'll kind of open it up for questions. And then after both of you have presented, people can sort of ask questions and say who they're asking the question to. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Great. All right. So go ahead, Herb.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this is my contribution to the consciousness panel. And what it is in a nutshell is integrating the theories of two, I feel, brilliant people, Antonio Damasio and Carl Jung. Antonio Damasio is a current figure. Carl Jung is someone who lived in the 20th century. Just a moment. So my two main sources of insight on the nature of consciousness are the neuroscience researcher Antonio Damasio, from his book, Feeling and Knowing, Making Minds Conscious, and the psychology researcher Carl Jung in his collected works from volume 10, an article called The Undiscovered Self. It's about self-development. So Damasio says, now this is a definition of consciousness, and then I'll present one by Jung, a commentary by Jung. Okay. Damasio says that consciousness equals awareness plus a sense of ownership of our thoughts and feelings. In other words, that the awareness, the things that we are aware of, the images and sensations, and the things that we're thinking about, belong to a self, and namely ourselves. We're at the center of this universe of awareness. Okay, Carl Jung says that consciousness is whatever the ego is aware of, just the sum total of that, but that there's a way of gaining new knowledge, so knowledge can expand, and that consciousness expands when the ego becomes open to the images triggered by the unconscious. In other words, when we set ourselves open to the unconscious, new knowledge and images are created. This integration process is called individuation, meaning indivisible. In other words, so that the self is composed of the conscious and the unconscious acting together. They're separate, but they can communicate. And learning how to communicate is part of the discipline that he developed. Okay, so now the root cause and operation of consciousness is after many years of neuroscience research, Damasio concluded in his 2021 book that consciousness is generated by a continual negotiation about reality between the two grand collections of nervous systems in the body. These are the central nervous system, or CNS, including the brain and spine, and the body's other three nervous systems, which are the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, and the enteric nervous systems. I would guess that the enteric refers to the gut, the gut's nervous system. Together, these three are called the peripheral nervous system. So these I look at as two kingdoms of nerves, and they meet and interact, according to Damasio, through the spinal ganglia structure at the base of the spine. So the brain is connecting itself to the rest of the body through the body's nerves that are outside the brain system, and what they're going to do is negotiate with each other through that spot, communicating through that spot. Various components of each kingdom can be called into play in these ongoing rounds of negotiation. In other words, the brain has subparts, and some of them are used, and similarly in the body's nervous system, there are elements that are used in order to construct consciousness. You could say construct or sense consciousness. So various components of each can be called into play, so that you can have negotiation and collaboration, including the various brain areas previously thought by researchers to themselves be the center of consciousness in the brain, such as the parietal lobe, the thalamus, and the brainstem. I'll go in a little more detail with him now. Okay, the parietal lobe, this was championed by Arnold Trehub, and I knew him through the ResearchGate website. And this brain sub-area integrates the input of vision, hearing, and other senses into a 3D and even 4D, that is a time-sensitive, time-moving image of reality. Okay, so the parietal lobe is the dramatic stage of the brain. Everything is put together. You know, it's like you put together a play. So an image is put together of a moment, of a series of moments. That was Arnold Trehub's theory. And, I think he called it the retinoid space. And he said all of civilization came out of that area of the brain. Okay. The thalamus was another candidate that was pointed to by Ravi Jerath, connecting one brain area to another and as a service transforming the form of the data that was sent. There are 6 layers in its pipeline. So Ravi Jerath was saying that the thalamus is a complex thing. It was used to be considered a rather simple thing, just a kind of a switchboard cables. But these were very smart cables, able to connect one part of the brain with another and make it what came out from one end to the other to be understandable at the other end. The third area that I mentioned is the brainstem, and Carl Jung and Jaak Panksepp, a 20th and 21st century researcher, felt that this was the center of consciousness. This area is one of the oldest areas of the brain. It controls motor functions. We can look at awareness and consciousness and their relation to each other in 2 different ways. And in one way, awareness leads to consciousness, and the other way, consciousness leads to awareness. So in the first case, in the case of the brain, awareness can lead evolutionarily to consciousness, that is self-awareness. That's where there is a self at the center who owns the feelings. One test for this is to put a spot on an animal's forehead. This is for self-awareness. And you use a mirror. The animal looks into the mirror, and then we notice if the animal touches the spot. If it does, then that means that there's self-awareness. A chimp does touch his forehead. A monkey does not. An elephant also does touch the forehead or wherever the spot is put. Now, that was the brain environment. Now, in the environment of the mind, which Jung talks about the psyche as a structure, consciousness can lead psychologically to deeper awareness of things in the unconscious. We have transpersonal psychology, where abnormal, unusual states of consciousness are achieved. One example is the Ralph Waldo Emerson's experience described in essay Crossing Boston Commons. He said it was an extraordinary experience, but that anyone could have, he said, without special training, because usually such experiences were considered to take years and years of training by a master to reach that level. Now, he also said that people with different sensitivities and also training might lead to deeper experiences, but they all could have extraordinary experiences. And one characteristic that science has shown to be present is a sense of awe. And it's a passive state at seeing something very new and different that has to be, figured out or digested. Technology and consciousness. There are quite a few ways in which technology comes into play in affecting consciousness. Psilocybin is made, it's a substance like mushrooms. It is a hallucinogen. It's been used in medical experiments. So the hallucinogen experiences have been shown to counteract the fear of death in terminally ill stage 4 cancer patients. This research was done at NYU, and before taking the chemical, people had this fear, and after having the experience of taking the chemical under controlled circumstances and with lots of reassurance and supervision, the person no longer had that feeling. That was true of most of the participants. So that's one kind of technology and consciousness intersection. Another kind is augmented and virtual reality, learning about and experiencing new environments, including the sense of standing on the surface of Mars, looking at the sky. That's something that, again, might in some people produce a feeling of awe if it were staged properly, and depending on the readiness of the person. That's virtual reality. Now, augmented reality is when we add information on superimposed to this experience. It might name some of the stars or put labels on mountains in the distance. That's augmented reality. You're looking, that would be true if you were standing on Mars, but you could do it in this too. Next one is the metaverse from Facebook. And I'm going to take this to an extreme. This is a future development, I predict, of learning what it's like to be a species of animal. There's a classic paper on what it is like to be a bat. It asks what is required to actually have the experiences that a bat has, and the author says we can't really fully achieve it, but on the other hand, from what I've seen, we can experience some of the qualities of it, and we can so that when we choose our avatars, we might want to make them animals, and then we'll know what it feels like to be that animal, and it gives us additional things to express. And when we're sitting around a table and everyone is one kind of animal or imaginary creature. As I say, that would be considerably into the future, but certainly imaginable and I think desirable. The next one is active imagination, which is an invention of Jung. Inviting the unconscious to offer an unexpected revelatory image when you're thinking about a particular thing, and you want to get the take, get information from the unconscious on how you can deal with a problem or something, how you can enjoy an experience. So that it is an object that you want to understand at a deeper level. Active imagination can be done in a variety of different ways. Finally, there's the calibrated self, the measured self, and self-knowledge, which is some of it's measured, some of it is insight, as both are part of a person. So you could imagine a collection of personal attributes and understandings, including the personal genome. That's going to become part of each person's collection of self-information. Okay, those are the things I wanted to talk about, and I have some conclusions. The pairing of Damasio's insights with those of Jung furnished me with the most satisfying picture of consciousness currently available, integrating body with brain physically, and in the mind, integrating conscious psyche with the unconscious psyche, all in a unifying harmony. Damasio says that consciousness does not require a mystical explanation in order to be understood. This, to me, does not mean that our scientific understanding of consciousness cannot be enhanced by ideas of universal connectivity, of a scientific kind that cannot currently be easily studied. Buckminster Fuller believed that everything in the universe is somehow connected. Perhaps that is the case and will one day be understood. I think that I kind of lean in that direction myself. It may not be exactly that. There may be other kinds of relationship between things in the world. I think that those things are there, but we don't yet know how to get a handle on it. Or perhaps in the things that have been talked about by Himanshu, maybe some of the answers lie there. Okay, thank you very much. And we'll move on to the next speaker.
Great. Thanks so much, Herb. And Dr. Mehta, why don't you go ahead with your presentation?
Yeah, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, so I don't have a presentation. I don't have a slide.
That's okay. Just go ahead and share.
Yeah, so I will just, so I will try to combine a lot of things that was raised and all that rather than what I was planning to present. But 2-3 things I want to tell first. So the 4 questions that basically we started with Garrett, or which Garrett started with. What is consciousness? Well, that is how we define it. And that can be defined, that science defines as, and the way I like to put it would be that it is the awareness of one's own unique awareness. I repeat, awareness of one's unique awareness. Why once is very important, because consciousness includes something called qualia, which in science we call the feeling of the redness of the red or the meanness of the me. So that is one thing. Second thing, we also confuse being conscious, being aware, and consciousness. So to be conscious is not consciousness. I hope that is understood. So consciousness is, as I told you, the awareness of one's own unique awareness, whereas conscious is being aware, just being aware of being aware. And these are 2 different things. And awareness is also just awareness. It means aware of the environment, internal, external, whatever. Right? So let me put these things in place first. So then what is the root cause of consciousness? Well, if you ask me this question, if I talk from purely science, there is no answer. Nobody knows. While there are theories, while I was doing my PhD, I came across around 40 different theories, and there may be more, but I happen to study 40 different theories that exist. Some of the, what I call plausible ones. One is panpsychism, as I think Himanshu mentioned, IIT, as Sanjay mentioned, but there is a new one also which is coming, which is called so it is called Conscious Electromagnetic Information Field Theory, which is as recent as 2020. My only submission is that while yes, these are theories, but none of them can conclusively tell us that this is the root cause of consciousness. So till that time, I would only say we don't know, or we are trying to know. Can technology help? So as Herb mentioned, psilocybin or any drugs and all that, well, they alter the state of consciousness. That doesn't mean you are getting to consciousness, you are getting to experience consciousness. So that is another question that we have to understand. Somebody mentioned that, so if I suppose killed you, I think that was Ocean was mentioning, so you had a machine gun on your brain and then you stop expressing. My counter question would be, so if there's a dead body, why doesn't it express? The brain is there, everything is there, isn't it? So the point is that, well, we are, as everyone knows, consciousness is a difficult topic. Why it is difficult is because it seems to work on the dualities, maybe, if you want to call it. So some people like to call it the mind body or the subjective objective duality. Or nowadays they also, so this semi-field theory talks of what is called energy matter duality or the difference. And probably that is where maybe there lies some more hope of understanding what is happening in our brains. But I don't know if anyone has heard of this person called, he was a doctor, he is a doctor actually, Dr. Alexander, who is a neurosurgeon, I think, and he himself went into coma. And while he was in coma, then he experiences certain things. So then who was or what was experiencing if the brain was not functioning properly? So there are these kinds of questions which there are at least some experiences which are recorded experiences. You can read his book called The Proof of Heaven. There is another book which I would suggest everyone read, is called The Galileo's Error, because a lot of us are talking about science, I think Sanjay, and I think we should not be fanatic either of science or of whatever else we have, because these are just paths, and who knows which path is right or which path is wrong. We're just trying to understand certain phenomena that we observe. And while we are trying to understand these phenomena, we are trying to make sense of it. And that is what science is, trying to make sense. If we start putting, which is what science is doing, putting limits, and which is what Galileo's error would talk of, that why these limits have been put and all that. So I would suggest everyone to read that. We should not be fanatic about anything, because fanaticism of any kind leads to problems, you know that, right? So having said that, if I talk purely scientifically, we cannot talk of what is consciousness to the fullest extent. We can just give speculations. And in those terms, if we talk of speculate, I assume, and we have this concept of embodied cognition. So consciousness need not be limited only to the brain. It is a whole body thing, whole body experience. But it is not also only spiritual thing, because it expresses to the body. So you need the body and so-called spirit, if we go by Garrett's words. So it is a combination which creates consciousness, not just one or the other. While science would love to be deterministic or reductionist, as they call it, they would want everything to happen from the brain. But as I told you, this experience of Dr. Alexander shows that you can have consciousness without brain functioning also. So having said all this, I think I would leave it open to people, because we are already running out of time. So just about, I don't know if I made sense, but yeah, that's about the time I have. I would have loved to go deeper into explaining what I was talking or where I was coming from, but anyways.
You can say more, Dr. Mehta. If you want to leave time for questions, you can, but you're welcome to go up until the end. I know we ended up behind schedule. I don't want
It's okay, because if I start explaining, it will consume all the rest of the remaining time. So let's not. Maybe we'll have a separate talk some other day. We'll have a separate talk some other day. That will be.
Yeah.
Hey, Garrett, I have to leave in 1 minute. Can I ask a question, because I have my show coming up? Yeah. So I'm not fanatic about anything, science or anything, and I use my critical thinking and connect the dot with my own critical thinking. But so at the same time, when people are propagating 2 + 2 = 7, I tend to ask a question: why 2 + 2 = 7? Doesn't make sense to me. Well, anyway, having said that, I've been meditating for 30 years. I've met a lot of the quote unquote enlightened gurus, whether Indians or Tibetans, serious gurus closely associated with the Dalai Lama. And I myself had thousands of mystical, mind-boggling experience. So I know what you're talking about pretty well. But my ultimate conclusion as a point is still, it's our brain producing those sense of awe, sense of eternity, sense of sereneness, sense of timelessness, because of our brain produce the thing called neuropeptide in our brain. If somebody machine gunned my brain and completely destroyed it, I'm gonna experience no consciousness, nothing visible. That's it. So, I can appreciate your probably, if you think as analogy, that would be perfect. I agree with the gentleman said about Jung that we expand our ability when we go beyond our egos or go beyond our past memory, past condition, and maybe tune into a nothingness or infinities, and we can expand our consciousness or ability. I totally agree. So that's why I meditate rigorously for the last 30 years. But that's all I have to say. Garrett, thank you so much. I have more to say, but I have to go. But thank you, Garrett. Keep up your great work.
Thanks, Ocean. Great to see you. Thanks for your questions. Will, go ahead.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, well, I was just going to say something about meditation as well. I was thinking when Himanshu was saying you can only ascertain so much about the nature of thought through thinking. It's like thinking can't really investigate itself. It's like we're on a treadmill, and we're locked into those parameters on the treadmill, and it's occurring in our prefrontal cortex. Thoughts are arising, and we're trying to make sense of the world locked in here. But when you meditate, and you do get, as Himanshu said, that sense of, I don't know, bliss, stillness, calmness, it just arises. And so I just can't emphasize enough the importance of actually just getting out of your head and just sit there. And if anybody hasn't tried it, just try and sit there and count 10 breaths, follow 10 breaths without having a thought. It's almost impossible when you first start. And it just shows how much we're locked into this sort of prefrontal cortex determined view of reality, which is not necessarily reflective of what there is to experience. So it's just a big plug for meditation. And I'm going to put something in the chat there, if that's okay, a link to one of the best meditation teachers you will ever find, if anybody's interested. Thanks very much.
Can I just make a brief comment?
Sure, go ahead, Betsy.
Yeah, so I appreciate all your perspectives, and I don't want to be dogmatic. At the same time, like Ocean mentioned, the reason why in science we have certain limits is to kind of guide our thinking and not to make unnecessary assumptions. At the same time, like you brought up that Jason Alexander's book, and I invite everybody to go to YouTube and watch the debate with Sam Harris. He says that he had no brain activity, and that's brain dead, and he was not brain dead. He was in a coma. So, there's a distinction between brain dead and being in a coma that I think, people should look up and look up the distinction between those two states. Another thing, just real quick, is that the separation of consciousness and sentience, our feelings and our thinking are two different processes. I am like a type 1 diabetic, right? So when my blood sugar drops or when I inject insulin more than I should, and I start feeling this sense of doom because my blood sugar is plummeting and I feel shaky and all this stuff, it's just a feeling of doom. I'm not thinking like what's happening, I'm about to pass out. But it's there's different things, thinking is a process and feeling is a different thing. So I just want to make sure that we're not conflating things, like the brain dead and the being in a coma or a comatose state are two different things that I don't think should be conflated. That's all.
Yeah, I agree, Betsy, but I guess I agree with that point. But I guess as far as making unnecessary assumptions, physicalism and science have not come to any answer on where the root of consciousness is. So I don't think introducing a spirit is an unnecessary assumption. I think it's actually a very necessary assumption. In fact, I would argue that physicalism will never come to the root cause of consciousness, because it's not a physical root cause. The actual root cause of consciousness is a non-physical phenomenon, which is the spirit. And so, my hypothesis is that physicalists will never uncover the root cause of consciousness because it's not physical at all. So I don't think it's an unnecessary assumption. I think it's a necessary assumption, and one that explains something that's otherwise unexplainable by science. Does that make sense, Betsy?
Yeah, but it does like the same thing as saying, like introducing into that gap that we don't know, like, for example, we don't know like what originated, like what caused life to form, right?
No,
we
do.
don't know what
We
led
do.
to that.
We have really good insight. There have been experiments that reproduce the origins of life. So we have great insight into that. Scientists have rerun the experiments of the primordial ooze and have great hypotheses on that. So that's a very well understood thing that has a lot of experimental evidence.
Or let's say the Big Bang, like people are like, well, what caused it to start the Big Bang, and when people do that, they start to, instead of saying like, really, we don't know, there's the limits of our knowledge. We're trying to like figure it out, but then people start introducing concepts that are like woo-woo about God or spirit or the divine or all this stuff, which like doesn't really explain anything. It's just like a placeholder for like, we really don't fucking know. Like it's just beyond our understanding.
Did you ever read the scientific explanations for what existed before the Big Bang, before the initial moment of the Big Bang?
Yeah, so there's like the multiverse theory. There's a couple theories, and Steven Weinberg, talks about like the first 3 minutes and all the stuff. And people are still trying to figure out.
Before the first 3 minutes, Betsy, a million years before the first 3 minutes, what existed? And if you start to read those explanations, those are very woo-woo. They're very like nonsensical. In my opinion, they're nonsense. They make no logical sense whatsoever. The idea that there was a first moment in time is completely nonsensical in the first place. It's scientists trying to answer the question of the origin of the universe with a definitive answer. When they don't have the answer yet, they're trying to prematurely answer the question. And if you didn't come to our talk on the origins of the universe, you should watch that one. I don't know if you were there for that.
No, I wasn't.
Right, you should watch the video, but I don't want to digress onto that. I do want to make sure we let Sanjay ask his question because we're almost at 9 o'clock. If you have anything last minute things to add, Betsy, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just, like, I don't want to be dogmatic. At the same time, I don't want to start making up shit, like that's just my thing. Like I want to make sure that what I'm saying has some solidity going along with it and not just making up woo-woo, that's
right.
it.
But Betsy, ultimately what I would recommend you do is, use your best critical thinking skills and judgment to discern fact from fiction. And if you trust yourself to listen with an open mind to all ideas and see which one has the most merit without being dogmatic about it, you'll come to the right answer. But just remember that, that right answer may not be, the one that you were taught in school, right? That like what you were taught in school might not be the right answer because, back when I was in school, we were taught Pluto was a planet. Now Pluto's not a planet anymore. So just because you were taught that in school doesn't mean it's right. So just keep that in mind, like keep an open mind to new ideas, use your own critical thinking. You're a smart person and you'll figure out the answers. And that said, I want to let Sanjay go with his question.
Yeah, thanks. So I think a lot of things that I've heard tonight, and I do have a strong understanding. I've studied areas of consciousness. I've studied, I understand biology better than I think most of the speakers that you had. I don't know about, I think Krishnesh Mehta, I think he may be a physician, but obviously he would have a better understanding if he is. But still, consciousness, I have a pretty good understanding. I felt a lot of information was left out. Actually, let me just say that people are bringing up ideas around dogmatism and things like that. This really isn't about dogmatism. It's around evidence-based thinking, right? Versus what I would say is speculation. I heard a lot of speculation without any actual way to prove or demonstrate whether the ideas that some people had, whether they can be actually tested or shown, using evidence. So that's a serious issue that I think needs to be understood, that the way we work, the way everything in our world works is that we have to have evidence around it. Other than that, it's just a theory that kind of sits there and we can do nothing with it. This thing you said about Pluto, that's a false analogy, because the renaming of Pluto has nothing to do with anything. It doesn't change what Pluto actually is. It's simply a renaming of the word. We went from planet to dwarf planet. It doesn't do anything. So that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I do want to pose one example and one question, I guess, to the panel. And that is, before that, let me explain one thing, that in the neurosciences, it's very well understood that consciousness is not one entity. And the problem that happens in most discussions around consciousness is that everybody talks about consciousness as if it's one homogeneous entity. It is not. For example, you'll see aspects of lower level consciousness in many types of animals. You'll see mid-level or higher level consciousness in higher level animals, mammals and even other primates. And then we see only the highest level consciousness in humans, although there's been some findings of even that level of consciousness possibly in some types of birds and maybe even porpoises. But the discussion tonight was really about the human level consciousness, what Dr. Mehta described as the awareness that you're aware, the self-awareness that you're self-aware. That is the human level of consciousness that, by definition, is what we're talking about. But the question I'm going to pose is that we're dealing with humans. So when an infant is born, right, on day one, or even in utero, do they have consciousness? And if not, then when does their consciousness arise? That's the type of example or the type of question that science would pose. And any theory that you have for consciousness needs to be able to answer, come up with a postulate or try to explain it. So, and neuroscience does explain this area. It says that consciousness, the type of consciousness we describe, human level consciousness arises within the first year of an infant, although for some infants it can be the second year. But during that first year, when they don't have human level consciousness, they have the lower level of animal type of consciousness. So they're aware of things, they're aware of their surroundings. They probably are also aware of their own perception, but they're not aware of their self-awareness. So that's the idea. So the question is, how would your theory or any other theory deal with this question around when does the highest level, human level of consciousness arise in a human infant?
So Sanjay, you missed our presentation on abortion. I presented on abortion, and I do answer that question. But I guess basically the long story short is that I think it's when the fetus starts acquiring memories, and more or less the more important distinction is when it starts making non-deterministic decisions, which is in the third trimester of being in utero. So you can go to that recording if you want to hear the full argument, but that's the 30,000 foot version. As far as Pluto being irrelevant, it is something we were taught in school, is that Pluto is a planet. It is no longer considered a planet. And I think if you're going to make a counter argument to my argument, you have to actually argue that schools have always taught correctly everything that's accurate and that they've never made any mistake. Because my only point in making the example of Pluto is to say sometimes schools historically, and if you go back to the 18th century, schools taught things that were wrong. Lots of things, we used to teach medical doctors that, leaching blood was going to help someone's health. Clearly that was wrong. So clearly institutions that we trust teach things that are wrong, Sanjay, and that's my only point. And I don't think you can contest that. As far as speculation, you yourself made the point that Dirac made hypotheses without data points and only on speculation, and that he created the innovations that caused modern science to come to existence. So I guess you yourself made the point that speculation is where it all starts, and I'm speculating. So I do have logical arguments to defend the speculation, and if you want to read them, read my paper, my essay on defending free will, and try to find a counter argument to my arguments in that essay.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick counterpoint to two of what you said. What I said about Dirac wasn't that he didn't use speculation. What I said that actually, even around speculation, what I was talking about was evidence-based. So I'm not saying speculation is bad. What I'm saying is evidence-based is the only thing that actually proves things. Speculation doesn't prove anything. That was my point. And in the example you gave with Dirac, which I started, Dirac actually proved using evidence, and that's important to understand. The second point is that around the so I'm not disagreeing that areas of knowledge that we gain from, for example, school system, etc., can be wrong. I agree with that. But the example, I simply said that the example you gave with Pluto, that doesn't really tell us anything, because what happened with Pluto was that they simply changed the label applied to what Pluto is. It's kind of like if we start with a food, that a company sells, and then later on they change the brand and they change the label on it. Well, that has nothing to do with it. They simply changed the label. That's exactly what we did with Pluto. It doesn't mean the schools were wrong. It's that what was taught at that time was correct, and then because the Astronomical Society of the world decided to call it a new name, then the school started using that new name. There's nothing about right or wrong there.
Sanjay, maybe I came up with a bad example off the top of my head. My only point is that authority is not 100% correct every time. And
Yes, I agree. I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
So we are on the same page there. The other question about Dirac is he didn't prove using evidence. He originally came up with a hypothesis based on mathematics, and he created a model which over time turned out to be proven true through data points and experimentation. Was that fair to say?
No. It was proven using data. In physics, everything is proven with data. That's the reason why dark matter and dark energy is so difficult, because we don't even know where to get the data from.
It's because there is no data. I don't think that they exist.
Today, yeah.
But yeah, I don't think they exist, but that's another story for another day. And if you want to listen to the argument on the origins of the universe, I give a good alternative hypothesis to one of the explanations given for dark energy. But that said, the idea is there is a, if you read the essay on free will, there is an experiment that I give that can prove me wrong. Whether or not, right now, all evidence shows, seems to move in the direction that human beings are non-deterministic. And if you read the essay on determinism, which I posted in the chat, determinism has been all but completely disproven unless you believe in global variables leading to quantum mechanical determinism, basically super determinism. Determinism has been all but completely disproven by accepted science. So that leaves the door open for randomness and or free will to explain our perception that we have free will, which everyone would agree we have a perception that we have free will. And then, you have to kind of use your own judgment about which one makes more sense. That randomness absolutely just decided to pretend, mask itself as if it's free will, or that free will is actually real.
Yeah, I'm gonna end it now, but I don't want to go too much into this further because I know we're running out of time. But I do want to say that a lot of the ideas that I'm hearing from you and others, you're linking ideas together in a very strong, tightly coupled way, which necessarily isn't the best thing to do. If you allow flexibility in some of these linkages, you might actually find truth in the nuances. For example, with determinism, you keep using determinism. Several people use it in a very Unitarian way, but determinism actually is a complex set of criteria. And for example, soft determinism actually will explain a lot of things that you're saying, and actually they apply more with some of the ideas that you're talking about. So determinism by itself, it hasn't been disproven. I would counter with that.
I didn't say it was disproven. I said it's all but disproven by accepted science. Super determinism is the only remaining way that determinism can hold ground, which is why super determinism had been come up as a theory. But again, I wasn't trying to say it was completely disproven. It's been all but disproven. And I gave the example of where it would exist is if subatomic, if mass energy further away than outer space was impacting subatomic particles in a deterministic way. So, but again, that's the essay on determinism if you want to read it. That said, Dr. Mehta, I don't know if you want to reply to Sanjay. And we do need to wind down in the next few minutes.
I think what Sanjay is mentioning is that is okay. I mean, what he's saying is right from where he's coming. And that's mentioned that, I mean, all the 4 questions, technically from science point of view, if you ask, we don't have any answers. We have only theories. So if you ask technically what is consciousness, we just have some pointers, but not necessarily conclusive answers. And that is what I think he's mentioning. And that's all I mean, that part we can agree on that. But what I think Garrett and all are trying to do is trying to bring in some new perspectives, a new way of looking at it, of course. But yes, what he says is that there should be more evidence which is taken. But if suppose you want to speculate, because sometimes speculation may not have evidence, so you can speculate and then probably look for evidence. That is also what happens in science. So I mean, nothing against. I think all of us are talking the same language. We are trying to improve our knowledge about things. So in that way, I think all of us are on the same page.
So Bruce, I'll let you have the last question for the evening.
Oh, thank you very much. There's two things basically. One is, just because there's determinism or deterministic equations that describe how the universe works does not necessarily mean that there is no free will. So they're not completely opposite to each other, that there's either determinism and therefore no free will. There can be determinism and there can still be free will, depending on what is known as like the predictability of applied mathematics to what is. So I think that we need to look, I think it should be very carefully looked at regarding this argument of, just because we're saying that there are deterministic equations that describe the behavior of the universe does not necessarily mean there is no free will or that there is complete predictability. Secondly, I was looking at this idea of consciousness, which may possibly be a property of the space-time continuum rather than a property of the individual. And I just wanted to bring that up in certain solutions to Schrödinger's equation. There is one school of science that is losing ground rapidly. It's the Copenhagen interpretation, which Schrödinger showed was incorrect. And there's the other, which I would call the Schrödinger school as far as quantum mechanics is concerned. And so the idea of probability is rejected by a lot of scientists that I happen to know. It's rejected by myself. And so that, you know, this idea of randomness and so forth, determining whether or not there is free will, is unnecessary. I'll just use that word, that it's unnecessary. So these are just statements that I wanted to make. I did like the idea of looking at from certain ways of viewing things from India, that it seems that there's a direction that consciousness is something that is perhaps not exactly determined specifically by the individual. It may be a property of the space-time continuum, and therefore we, as a result, are a property or a result of certain properties within the space-time continuum. So I'll thank you very much for allowing me to say what I wanted to say.
No problem. Thanks, Bruce. I do want to thank everybody for their contributions tonight, and for questions and comments. Really a lot of interesting, thoughtful conversation and questions. I want to thank all the presenters for presenting, and I want to encourage everyone to come next Tuesday. We're going to be talking about justice and fairness, and what does that mean, and how do we accomplish it? And so we'd love for people to join there, and also in the online community, which I think Ellis sent the links to in the chat. And so we'd love for people to join there. We have a lot of interesting conversations there between our Tuesday night events. And so just want to thank everyone again, and wish you all a great evening or morning, depending on, or super late evening as DLJ is now. Thank you for staying up so late to join us. You definitely take the cake for the most dedicated tonight. So thanks for that, and appreciate everyone's contributions. We didn't get a chance tonight to ask for the people who are quieter to speak up. I apologize for that. We were just running way behind. We normally like to do that to bring the introverts out, because they usually have super interesting questions. But please bring them out in the online community where you can feel comfortable bringing your questions up. And I welcome feedback on anything we've talked about tonight in the online community. So thanks again, everybody, speakers, questioners, and observers alike. I hope you all have a great night, day, and very late night.
Likewise, Garrett. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Thanks a lot.